Good morning, nerds. It is I. So far, I've made plenty of videos about tabletop RPGs, but they're only useful if you're in an RPG group yourself. So, the big question. If you don't have an RPG group, then how do you make one? That's actually a pretty broad question, so for my own sanity, I'm going to make two assumptions. One, I'll assume that you are an aspiring GM rather than a player, although players can benefit from this advice. And two, I'll assume you're building a group from scratch. If you want to join an existing group as a player, that's super easy. Find an LFG listing, I'll explain what those are later, for your preferred system, at your preferred time, at your preferred location or virtual tabletop. If you're a GM and you already have a full group's worth of players asking for a game, congratulations, you already have a group. For everyone else, please sit down, buckle up, and keep your calendars at the ready. But before we go any further, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications, as doing so will improve your chances of finding players by up to 9.3%. Probably, maybe, hopefully. Honestly, nothing can really guarantee that you'll find players. Before I can teach you how to assemble a group, you need to decide what sort of group you want. First, choose a game system. I discussed this briefly in my Learning to GM video. Psst, watch it! And in that video I said you should pick a system that's popular and easy to learn. However, for the purposes of this video, the system you pick only needs to be popular. For instance, in my Learning to GM video, I did not mention Pathfinder at all. The simple reason is that despite being one of the most popular RPGs out there, it has a very complex rule set. If you've never played or GM'd an RPG before, the simplicity of the rules matters, but if you've already spent a year in a Pathfinder 2e group, that doesn't matter nearly so much. The reason the RPG you pick needs to be popular is obvious, but that's never stopped anyone, myself included, from ignoring it. The more popular an RPG is, the more people will be interested in playing it, the more potential players there are, the more players you can actually get. Speaking from experience, even if you're trying to get people who are super into niche indie RPGs, it's really hard to pitch a campaign for a niche indie RPG. Within the industry, it's something of a meme that RPG sales do not correlate with RPGs being played. So I honestly recommend that you pick a reasonably popular trad RPG like D&D 5e, Pathfinder 2e, Call of Cthulhu, or Cyberpunk Red. If you're edgy, different, and not like other girls, then go for OSR, Powered by the Apocalypse, or Fate. These last three don't technically fall into the trad RPG umbrella, but are still popular enough for you to find enough players for them. Hopefully. Attempt at your own risk. Next, consider whether you're playing online or in person. I've discussed this before, but I'll go over the choice again in brief. In-person play offers a stronger, more social atmosphere, it lets you use real dice, and it gets you out of the house. I really can't overstate how important this is for your mental health. Seriously, go outside. Do it. Finish watching this video first, and then go outside. Online play, meanwhile, is generally more focused, as there are fewer distractions. It allows you to play with anyone in the world, and it's slightly cheaper, as there's no travel costs, buying dice, etc. I talk more about the practical considerations of these choices in my Learning to GM video, but for now, you need to pick what works best for you. If you're in a large city, or even just a medium-sized university town, you'll have a substantial player base at your fingertips. If you live farther out, or if you ignored my advice from the last slide and decided to run Ars Magica or RuneQuest or something else, then you'll benefit more from the globe-spanning online player base. Finally, take a moment to consider what you actually want to run. You might have your campaign fully prepared before you even start advertising, or you might have literally no idea what to run. Personally, I recommend coming up with a vague campaign concept to use when advertising your game, and then doing your prep at the same time as you hunt for players. And once you know what you want, it will finally be time to get it. So, if you want players to sign up for your game, you need them to, sign up for your game. This is achieved through some form of advertisement. I'll start by discussing the different ways you can advertise a game, then I'll talk about what to put in the damn thing. Here are your options. 1. Word of mouth. This is the lowest tech advertising method. Basically, you tell all your friends, hey, I'm thinking of running X system at Y time. You down? And just asking that over and over until enough people say yes. This method works best if A, you're an extrovert, and B, your in-person friends are all as nerdy as you are. I've always been slightly introverted myself, so although I recruited the odd player this way, I've had much more trouble assembling an entire group purely through my network of friends. Your mileage may vary though. 2. Referrals / the resident extrovert. Instead of doing your own word of mouth advertising, get one of your players to do it for you. This might be a formal arrangement. About 2 years ago, I had an old player approach me out of the blue asking if I could run a new game. I said I could prep something if she could find players for it, and find players she did. In other cases, it's more ad hoc, with the players offering to invite their friends once they've signed up. This has been a real boon for me. All my longest lasting campaigns, including my current one, have had at least one resident extrovert supplying players from their extended group of friends. 3. LFG listings. LFG is an acronym that either stands for looking for game or looking for group, depending on who you ask. More importantly, it's a term for an ad for an RPG group. LFG listings can be posted in any number of places, the largest being r/LFG on Reddit. Seriously, there are so many listings on there that despite never having a Reddit account, whenever people IRL ask me how to get into RPGs, I send them there. For those of us with too much self-importance to associate with mere Redditors, there's Discord. Almost every TRPG Discord server, whether it's run by an RPG publisher, a YouTuber, or an actual player, or even just a random fan server, has an LFG channel. I've made plenty of use of these over the years, and there are similar LFG spaces on RPG forums, but who uses forums anymore? A third option is going through TRPG and other gaming social groups. I got players for both of my first 2 campaigns by advertising through my university's game society. In the first case, I posted an ad in the society Facebook group, and in the second, I just popped a message in their Discord server. Of course, these methods can be mixed and matched. For my first ever campaign, I put up an ad on Facebook, which yielded 2 players for session 1. One of those players invited 2 of his friends to session 2, so even though the other player had quit, I was still 1 player up. I finally coaxed one of my close friends into joining, and the same week one of the session 2 invitees brought along his girlfriend. So within about 6 weeks, I had gone from 2 players to 5. Oh yeah, some quick advice. Advertising doesn't end until the group fills up. Even after you get enough players to start playing, you'll have plenty of chances to bring new people in. In fact, it's actually easier to recruit players into an existing group than it is into a new one. But that's where you advertise. Now let's talk how. This boils down to the following. Tell people what system you're playing, D&D 5e, Pathfinder 2e, Cyberpunk Red, etc. When it's happening, Sundays at 9 PM, sometime midweek, or just leave it TBD. Where it's happening, my place, a cafe on campus, online via Discord and Roll20, etc. And what the campaign is about. And it's also courteous to say how many players you need and how many you already have. You should have at least a 1 or 2 sentence elevator pitch for your prospective players. This will do much of the heavy lifting for you. It'll serve as a basis for whatever title you give your ad in an LFG listing, and it will be what you lead with when you pitch your game to an in-person friend. Knowing when the game will happen is useful, as is knowing the number of openings, but what will really get someone interested in your game will be the campaign's conceit. You'll be Age of Sail style pirates, but with magic and airships pulled by dragons. Or it's Call of Cthulhu, so it's set in 1920s America, but with lots of horrifying, unknowable, tentacle-covered monsters. No, I don't mean the politicians. Okay, yeah, maybe the politicians, but not just them. Your boy needs some variety. Keep it short, keep it sweet, and focus on what makes your campaign unique, or at the very least intriguing. Nevertheless, some of the people you pitch will be hesitant. Don't despair, there's always a chance to win them over. Here are the most common objections that you'll hear from potential players and how to handle them. 1. I don't know the rules. This objection is common among noobs. Promise that they can learn the rules as they go. You can even summarize the core mechanics in a sentence or so. You mostly just roll a 20-sided die, add a number that represents how good you are at what you're doing, and then compare it to a difficulty number, and if you're equal or over, then you succeed. The key here is making it sound simple, and more importantly, making it sound fun. 2. I don't think I can make it. If you don't have a set time yet, this one's easy. Ask them their availability, and promise to sync it with the other players as best you can. If you do have a set time already, start by asking what they have at that time, as it might be something that they can move around. Scheduling will always be tough, but if you can convince them to sign up with the promise of figuring things out later, then you can usually invest them enough to stick around and even move their schedule. 3. I'd feel silly acting in character. This is another common objection among noobs. Handle it with these steps. First, clarify that they don't have to do a voice for their character and can describe their actions in either first or third person, whichever is more comfortable. Second, tell them that feeling silly is kind of the point. Once you're actually in the flow of things, it gives you a sort of escapist release. The key here is making them feel relaxed. Their anxieties will go away with time, don't you worry. 4. I don't have the stuff for it. This one's easy. For physical dice, let them use yours. For books, if you have the PDF, send them a copy. If you only have the physical book, first off, get the PDF, you numpty, and then second, let them borrow your book during the session. If they've never used a virtual tabletop before and you're doing an online game, then make the whole process sound nice and easy. I use Roll20, so my pitch is basically just, hey, it's free, it runs on your browser, and I can teach you how to use it. If you're using a more complex or expensive option like Foundry, then focus on pointing out the utility that it offers. The key here is to either provide for their gaming gear needs, or to show them the value of making the investment themselves. 5. The story doesn't interest me. This is tough, but not unfixable. Ask why they dislike it. If you can reframe the pitch without changing your prep, then do that. If it's something in your prep that you can easily change, then offer to change it. If you can't get a straight answer, then suggest they join for a session or two, and if they really aren't interested, then they can always leave then. 6. I don't like the system. This objection usually comes from more experienced TRPGers, so ask them why. If they don't know the system and don't want to learn it, then give them a rundown of the mechanics, making it sound as easy as possible. If you know what systems they've already played, then either relate the mechanics to one of those systems, or show them what your system can do that one of theirs can't. If they've tried it before and they didn't like it, ask why. If it's something unrelated to the rules, say they didn't like the GM they were playing with, show them how you'll be different from the last guy. The key here is to show how playing the system with you will be better than anything they've had before. This is not an exhaustive list. No plan survives contact with the players, and that maxim still applies even if you haven't had the first session yet. Likewise, there are some people you just can't pitch. If you encounter them, move along. Finally, I'll close out this section with some advice given to me by the guy who used to manage corporate travel for HSBC. He wasn't a salesman himself, but he had a lot of experience of being sold to. What he said was this: the most persuasive people aren't the talkative types with the gift of the gab. Rather, they're the people who know how to listen. Most potential players will tell you what excites them and what worries them. So if you just ask them leading questions and keep drilling down into their feelings, they'll give you the information that you need to convince them to sign up. The minimum size for most RPG groups is 2 players, but for best results you need at least 3 or 4, especially since at least one player always drops out before session 1. Do be mindful of your maximum player limit. For most GMs that will be 5 players, and if you hit it, then stop advertising until a space opens up. Sometimes you'll get more players than you bargained for. Don't panic, but do stop looking. I told you all earlier about that player who offered to find a group for me if I could make a campaign for her. Well, about a week after we agreed that, she told me she had 6 players and 2 maybes. Now, my personal limit is 5. I told her to hold fire from now on, although I didn't immediately start kicking people. I'll tell you why later. So, whether you're drowning in signups or scraping the bottom of the barrel, once you've got at least a few players, it's on to the hardest part. Scheduling. Scheduling is the single biggest problem bedeviling RPG groups the world over. Be they new groups still trying to form, or old groups coming apart at the seams, I can only imagine that some evil calendar Illuminati has been conspiring in the shadows, cackling maniacally every time a campaign falls apart. Yet, you can beat them. With a good mix of consistency and flexibility, you can crush the calendar Illuminati, have them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of their cancels. Begin by taking a critical eye to your own schedule. Most RPG sessions last 2 to 4 hours and happen once a week. If you want a reliable game, you'll need at least one such slot, and preferably a choice of several. You'll also need time to prep your game. There's no golden rule for how long GM should prep, but I would say plan for 1 to 2 hours of prep per expected hour of play. In one go or in bits, and either on the day of the session or maybe a day or two before. If you don't have a reliable slot in your schedule for whatever reason, you have a few backup options. You could do fortnightly games, you could do a day-long session once a month, or you could do flexible scheduling where the game takes place at a different day and time each week, depending on which works best. I would say that a dependable weekly schedule is the platonic ideal, but life is not a platonic ideal, so you'll just have to work with what you can get. Whenever you pitch your campaign, timing will be one of the things that you get asked about the most. You have 3 big options here. First, you can set a single time slot and filter out anyone who can't make it. This works best if you only have limited availability. Second, you can say, hey, we'll determine the timing once we know who's going to be playing. And then we have my preferred method, which is a mix of the two. You give either a vague initial indication or a choice of options, and then narrow it down, such as midweek evenings UK time, or either Saturday or Sunday from 7 PM. The advantage of the first method is certainty. By front-loading the timetable discussion, you have a clear idea of who can and can't make your game. The downside is that you'll miss out on anyone who could have made the game if only you'd been more flexible. The advantage of doing all the scheduling after you get your players is that it lets you cast the widest possible net. But the downside is that these groups are the most likely to fall apart if it turns out that nobody's schedule actually lines up. The reason I prefer the third method is because it gives you the best of both worlds. You can filter people out who you know have no hope of making it, but it leaves you open enough to adapt to other people's schedules. In fact, go a step further. Give 2, maybe 3 options that you can 100% make, and let the players vote among themselves for which one you ultimately pick. Keep the list short so people don't get overwhelmed, and be prepared that not everyone will be able to make the winner. One way or another, you need to set a date along with a start and end time that works for enough players that you can form a viable group. As I said earlier, this might not be a rigid weekly schedule, but if I'm honest, that's what's given me the best results personally. In practice, what method works best will come down to your own availability. If you have an open schedule, make that clear to your players. On the other hand, if you can only do Fridays at 8 PM, then don't offer anything else. Just say that up front and let the dice fall as they may. Different players will respond better to different methods. Some more orderly players will want to hear a concrete time so they can plan around it, while more spontaneous types will be spooked by the rigidity of a single time option. Finally, the reason I said you want plenty of players before you start scheduling is because you'll inevitably lose a person or two due to scheduling conflicts. If you lose too many people, it's time to get back to advertising. Hey, I'm setting up a Cyberpunk Red game, and we've just had someone drop out. Do you want their spot? You've found your players, and you found a time that just about works for everyone, but you aren't out of the woods yet. You see, not all your players will make it to the first session, and even if they do, they might not last much beyond that. Remember that one campaign my player helped me start? Yeah, she found 6 people, even though, as I said, I can't handle more than 5 at once. But I didn't try to cull the group by force. 1, because I'm way too non-confrontational for that. And 2, because this was, my 5th campaign at this point, and I knew that I wouldn't have to. And I was right. Once we assembled all of the prospective players into a single group chat, it became pretty clear that one guy had no idea what a tabletop RPG was, and he quickly absented himself. I could have objection handled him, but I chose not to. We had another guy who did turn up to session 0, but not to session 1, but within a couple of weeks, we actually had a replacement for him, and we were back up to 5. This phenomenon of players dropping out and being replaced is what I call the churn. It starts as soon as you start assembling players, and continues until about session 3 to 5, at which point it slows down but never really goes away. Don't take it lying down, just find a replacement and get back to work. Unless you're in my position of needing to shrink the group, that is. Oh, and also, I should warn you, don't intentionally overcrowd your group, expecting people to drop, because Murphy's Law dictates that'll be the one time you find nothing but uber reliable players. As I said, the churn does continue forever, but keeping a group together once it's formed is really a video unto itself. For now, just get your campaign off the ground, and then worry later about making it go the distance. But sometimes things just don't work out. Maybe everyone dropped out hours before the first session, maybe you couldn't synchronize everyone's schedules, and maybe you just couldn't find anyone to begin with. I've been lucky that I've had 7 campaigns happen so far, and only 2 that never materialized. So, if the worst happens, if your campaign fails at the first hurdle, what do? First, don't be discouraged. This happens all the time. Most campaigns never get off the ground, and even those that do fizzle out within a couple of sessions. You aren't unlucky, if anything, you're actually pretty average. Hell, trying to actually start a campaign means you have more courage than a lot of people. Now that we've established that, it's time to figure out what actually went wrong. Here are the most common ways that RPGs can fall apart. 1. You didn't advertise enough. I don't know how many people you asked, but it might not have been enough. If all you did was ask your in-person friends, then next time advertise your game somewhere like Discord, Facebook, or Reddit. And if you did advertise on those, then make sure you advertise in even more places. 2. You picked an overly niche RPG. I don't know how often this actually happens, but it has happened to me once. The pitch for an obscure indie RPG is always incredibly difficult, even if you're going after veteran TRPGers. I don't care if its Kickstarter was 200% funded, most RPGs will never be played by anyone other than their designer and a handful of playtesters. Even for mid-sized RPGs, finding people is really tough. I ran Conan 2D20 for my second ever campaign, and while it's based on a recognized IP, and the publisher, Modiphius, is one of the biggest in the industry, I barely scraped 3 people, and when one of them quit, I went down to 2. So yeah, next time around, you might want to pick something more mainstream. 3. Scheduling collapsed. This is the most obvious problem. If your own weekly timetable is a chaotic mess, you can't really expect any better from your players. Until you stabilize it, you're doing RPGs on hard mode. But even if your own timetable is as reliable as a Swiss train schedule, then maybe you just picked a time that was too difficult for other people. I kind of feel bad for any Australians trying to organize an online game, because, the time difference between the Aussie East Coast and literally anywhere else is enough to break most scheduling. When you're suggesting times, then you need to not only consider what's good for you, but also what's good for others. You may need to rearrange your own schedule before you can actually get a slot that works. 4. Other people just flaked. Often, when things go wrong, there's something that you yourself did wrong, and by extension, there's something that you can improve. But sometimes you did everything right, and people just flaked on you. In that case, the only solution is to just find better people, which may mean that you actually have to, change where you're looking for prospective players. Once you know what went wrong, make a game plan and then start advertising again after a few weeks. Maybe you keep going with the same campaign concept, maybe you go for a new one. Either way, keep on going until you get it right. I often say that tabletop RPGs are the world's most difficult social activity, just because of the amount of effort it takes to even get a single session to happen, let alone a campaign. For all that, I've GM'd 7 campaigns, including my current one, and 2 of those campaigns have lasted over 30 sessions. And I've also had my fair share of one-shots and mini-campaigns here and there too. Getting a group together is incredibly challenging and requires a strong mix of charisma, perseverance, and sheer good luck. But you can do it. I believe in you. And it's a wrap. Thank you all so much for watching. This is a sequel/sister video to my learning how to GM video. If you haven't seen that one yet, then I suggest you watch it. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like, share it with your friends, and leave a comment down below. How's your experience been of getting RPG groups together? Do you have any advice you can give? And if you'd like to see more videos like this one, then please subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. It really does help the channel. Now, one of my players has been off for a couple of weeks to train some bread people. No, I refuse to elaborate. And so I am now off to go harass him to see if he can make next Saturday's game. So once more, thank you all so much for watching, and until I see you next, farewell.